Of course, Vivian had said in a tone that suggested my cake would be in the garbage before midnight. She'd taken the carrier from my hands with 2 fingers, as if contamination was a real concern. "Come in. Lucas is upstairs getting ready." I'd followed her through the entrance hall with its gleaming hardwood floors and abstract art pieces that probably had names and provenance. The house was even more beautiful than I'd remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows letting in the golden California evening light, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine, fresh flowers in crystal vases on every surface. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. Everything was the opposite of the home where I'd raised Lucas, the modest 3-bedroom ranch house with the leaky roof and the carpet we couldn't afford to replace and the furniture bought second-hand or inherited from relatives. "Lucas." Vivian had called up the floating oak staircase. "Your mother is here. Not Mom's here or Margaret's here. Your mother." As if I were a package that had been delivered, slightly inconvenient but necessary to acknowledge. My son had appeared at the top of the stairs, and for a moment, my heart had swelled with pride despite everything. At 42, Lucas was handsome, tall like his father, with Richard's dark brown hair that was just starting to show distinguished gray at the temples, and strong features that had matured well. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. "Mom," he'd said, descending the stairs with the kind of confident stride that came from years of success. "You're early." "I wanted to help," I'd repeated, hearing how small my voice sounded in their cavernous living room. "You know how I love to be useful." Lucas had reached the bottom of the stairs, and he'd exchanged a look with Vivian. It was quick, barely a second, but I'd been a mother for 42 years. I knew how to read my son's face, even when he was trying to hide something. That look had said, "We have a problem." "Actually, Mom," Lucas had begun, his tone taking on that carefully measured quality he used in business negotiations, "Vivian and I wanted to talk to you about tonight before the guests arrive." I'd felt my stomach begin to knot, the way it does when you sense bad news coming but can't quite identify its shape yet. "Of course. What is it?" Vivian had moved to stand beside Lucas, presenting a unified front. She'd folded her arms across her chest, a gesture that I'd learned over the years was her tell for when she was about to say something she knew would be unwelcome. "The guests arriving tonight are extremely important to Lucas's business," she'd said, her voice taking on the kind of patient tone usually reserved for explaining things to children or the elderly. "Thomas Hendrickson's family, the Hendricksons of Boston, they're old money. His father, Charles Hendrickson Jr., is a venture capitalist who's considering a major investment in Lucas's tech startup." "That's wonderful," I'd said, genuinely pleased. Lucas had been working on his software company for 3 years, pouring every resource into developing some kind of data analytics platform that I'd never fully understood but had always supported. "It is wonderful," Lucas had agreed. "This could be the break we've been waiting for." "But Mom, the thing is, these people are used to a certain level of sophistication," Vivian had cut in, apparently tired of Lucas's careful approach. "Margaret, these aren't your average dinner party guests. The Hendricksons travel in circles where your alma mater, your summer home, your family connections, these things matter. Charles Hendrickson went to Harvard. His wife, Catherine, is on the board of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Thomas himself did his MBA at Wharton." "I see," I'd said, though I wasn't sure I did. "Not yet. The point is," Vivian had continued, "first impressions are critical in these situations. Lucas and I have worked very hard to position ourselves as the kind of couple that serious investors want to back. We've cultivated an image of success, stability, and social compatibility." The knot in my stomach had tightened. "And you're worried I'll ruin that image?" "Mom, that's not what we're saying," Lucas had interjected quickly, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes directly. "It's just that these networking events are delicate. Everyone's being evaluated, not just the business proposal. They're looking at our lifestyle, our social graces, our family background, your family background," I'd repeated slowly. "You mean, they're looking at where you came from?" "And I'm where you came from." Vivian's patience had seemed to crack, just a fraction. "Margaret, let's be honest. You're 70 years old. You live in a small apartment in Santa Monica. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. Your background is working class. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's not the story we've been telling about Lucas's origins. The story you've been telling? My voice had risen slightly despite my attempt to stay calm. What story have you been telling? Lucas had run his hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache with memories of him doing the same thing as a nervous child. We may have simplified some details about my background. Let certain assumptions stand uncorrected. What kind of assumptions? The kind where people think Lucas comes from money, Vivian had said bluntly. The kind where his last name, Montgomery, carries a certain weight. People hear Montgomery and they think of the shipping Montgomerys, the ones with the estate in Connecticut and the summer homes in Martha's Vineyard. I'd felt like I'd been slapped. But Lucas has nothing to do with those Montgomerys. Richard's family disowned him when he married me. We've never taken a penny from them. Yes, well, we haven't exactly advertised that fact, Vivian had said. And tonight, with the Hendricksons here, we need to maintain certain appearances. So what are you asking me to do? I'd asked, though part of me had already known. Part of me had felt it coming like a storm on the horizon. Lucas and Vivian had exchanged another look. We're asking you to be discreet tonight, Lucas had said finally. To let us handle the socializing with the guests. There's a small room off the kitchen. It used to be a maid's quarters when the house was first built. It's comfortable, private. You can wait there during the party. Watch some TV, relax. And after everyone leaves, we can all have dinner together, just the three of us. We can catch up properly then. The words had hung in the air between us like poison gas. You want me to hide, I'd said flatly. We want you to be comfortable, Vivian had corrected, but her eyes had betrayed her. She wanted me invisible. Mom, please try to understand, Lucas had said, and I'd heard desperation creeping into his voice. This investment could change everything for us. We're talking about a potential $10 million funding round. That kind of money would make the company viable, would let us expand nationally, would secure our future. But Charles Hendrickson is old school. He invests in people as much as businesses. He wants to see that we're the right kind of people. And I'm the wrong kind of people, I'd said, feeling something crack deep in my chest. I'd cut him off. Don't tell me that's not what you mean when it's exactly what you mean. The doorbell had rung, making all three of us jump. That's the caterers with the main course, Vivian had said, already moving toward the door. Her relief at the interruption had been palpable. Lucas, please show your mother to the back room. We need to supervise the setup and there's still so much to do. And that's how I'd found myself being guided through their professional-grade kitchen, all sub-zero appliances and Italian marble countertops, toward a small door beside the walk-in pantry that I'd never noticed during my previous visits. Lucas had opened it to reveal what had clearly once been a maid's room from when the house was built in the 1920s, before labor laws and social changes had made live-in help less common in California suburbs. The room was small, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with plain white walls, a narrow cot with a thin mattress, a single wooden chair that looked like it had come from a garage sale, and a small flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, probably a cast-off from one of their other rooms when they'd upgraded to something larger. There was no window. No decoration. No warmth. Just a holding cell for inconvenient family members. Mom, I'm really sorry about this, Lucas had said, and at least he'd had the decency to look uncomfortable. His eyes had darted around the small room, unable to settle on anything. It's just for tonight. Just until this one party is over. A few hours at most. I'd looked at my son, this man I'd carried in my womb, nursed through colic and chicken pox and teenage heartbreak, worked double shifts at the library to afford his college textbooks, held during his father's funeral when he'd sobbed like the child he'd once been, and I'd felt something fundamental shift inside me. Lucas, I'd said quietly, when did I become someone you needed to hide? He'd flinched as if I'd struck him. It's not like that, Mom. You're making this into something it's not. Then what is it like? Explain it to me. Make me understand how a mother being hidden in a back room during her son's party is anything other than exactly what it looks like. He'd run his hand through his hair again, that nervous gesture. Vivian's been under enormous pressure. Her family has certain expectations, and my business is at a critical stage. These investors, they're not just looking at our business plan and our financials. They're evaluating everything. Our home, our lifestyle, our connections, our family background. We just need to make the right impression tonight. And I'm the wrong impression. You're my mother and I love you, he'd said, but the words had sounded rehearsed, hollow, like lines from a script he'd memorized but didn't feel. But you have to understand, this party could determine our entire financial future. Vivian and I have put everything into this company. We've mortgaged the house, maxed out our credit cards, put our entire lives on hold for this opportunity. If the Hendricksons invest, we're set. If they don't. He'd trailed off, but I'd heard what he hadn't said. If they don't invest, it would be my fault for ruining their carefully constructed image. Through the kitchen, I'd heard Vivian's voice, sharp and imperious, directing the catering staff. No, no, no. The champagne flutes go on the left side of the bar cart, not the right. And someone needs to do something about that thing on the counter. That homemade cake. It doesn't fit the aesthetic. Put it somewhere out of sight. My cake. The one I'd spent all afternoon making because I'd remembered how much Lucas used to love it, how he'd sneak pieces for midnight snacks, how he'd once told me it tasted like home. Now it was something that didn't fit the aesthetic. Please, Mom, Lucas had said, and I'd heard real pleading in his voice now. Just a few hours. That's all I'm asking. Just give me this one thing. One thing? I'd repeated, and I'd felt something hard and cold forming in my chest. Lucas, do you remember when you wanted to go to Stanford for your undergraduate degree, but we couldn't afford it? Do you remember how I took on extra work, shelving books at the library until midnight 4 days a week, so we could supplement the partial scholarship they offered you? Mom, do you remember when your father had his first heart attack, and I had to quit my full-time position to take care of him? How we lived on my part-time salary and his disability checks for 3 years. How I went back to night school to get my library science degree so I could eventually become head librarian and get us back on our feet. I remember, he'd said quietly. Do you remember when you wanted to start your company, when you needed capital, and the banks wouldn't give you a business loan because you didn't have collateral? Do you remember where you got the money? His face had gone pale. Mom, this isn't the time. I gave you $50,000 from my retirement fund, I'd continued, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. Money I'd been saving for 30 years. Money that was supposed to keep me comfortable in my old age. I gave it to you because I believed in you, because you're my son, because I would have done anything to help you succeed. And I'm grateful for that, he'd said, but his eyes had been darting toward the door, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. Are you? Because right now, asking me to hide in this room, it doesn't feel like gratitude. It feels like I've become an embarrassment. A liability. Something to be managed and hidden away. Lucas's expression had hardened then, and I'd seen something in his face I'd never seen before. You want honesty, Mom? Fine. You've done a lot for me. I'm not denying that. But that doesn't give you the right to sabotage my future. Tonight is important, more important than your feelings about where you sit during a party. So yes, I'm asking you to stay in this room. To be quiet. To let me handle this one crucial evening without making it about you. The words had hit me like a physical blow. Making it about me? Yes. Everything always has to be about what you've sacrificed, what you've given up, how hard you've worked. I get it, Mom. You had a tough life. You raised me alone. You made sacrifices. But I didn't ask for any of that. I didn't ask to be your entire reason for existing. And I won't let you use it as leverage to guilt me into ruining the most important business opportunity of my life. I'd stared at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something inside me die. I see, I'd said quietly. Relief had flooded his face. So you understand? Oh, I understand perfectly. Voices had erupted in the living room, the first guests arriving, right on schedule. I'd heard Vivian's bright, false laugh, the kind she used when she was performing for an audience. "Lucas," she'd called. "I need you out here." My son had looked at me one more time. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand. After the party, we'll have a proper visit. I promise." Then he'd stepped back and closed the door, leaving me alone in the small, dark room. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the sounds of the party beginning on the other side of the wall. Cheerful greetings. The pop of champagne corks. Vivian's voice, syrupy and bright, "Welcome. We're so thrilled you could make it." I'd felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I'd refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them, or myself, the satisfaction of breaking down. Instead, I'd pulled out my phone and used its flashlight to look around the room more carefully. That's when I'd noticed something interesting. The room wasn't quite as sealed off as Lucas and Vivian probably thought. There, behind a stack of storage boxes in the corner, was another door. It was old, painted over multiple times in different shades of white, clearly original to the house's 1920s construction. The servants' passage. These old craftsman homes had been built during an era when domestic staff were common, and they'd included hidden passages so that maids and housekeepers could move through the house without disturbing the family and their guests. Most had been sealed up during later renovations, but apparently, Lucas and Vivian hadn't been quite as thorough as they'd thought. I'd moved the boxes aside, carefully, quietly, and tried the door handle. It turned with a soft click. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, but my phone's flashlight revealed it ran parallel to the main house. Through the thin walls, I could hear everything happening in the living room with perfect clarity. "Absolutely thrilled about this partnership," a man's voice was saying, deep, cultured, with the kind of accent that came from private schools and summer homes in New England. "Thomas has been raving about your company's data analytics platform. Says it's genuinely revolutionary." "That's very kind of him," Lucas's voice responded. "We've put 3 years of development into the core algorithms. The applications for market analysis are really quite extraordinary." "I'm sure they are," the man continued. "But Charles, that's my father, he always says that technology is only half the equation. The other half is the people behind it. That's why we wanted to meet you both in a more personal setting. Get a sense of who you are beyond the business plan." "We completely understand," Vivian's voice chimed in. "Lucas and I believe that good business relationships are built on personal trust and shared values." I'd pressed my ear closer to the wall, listening. "Your home is absolutely beautiful," a woman's voice said, probably Catherine Hendrickson, Thomas's mother. "Such wonderful restoration work on a classic craftsman. These old homes have such character." "Thank you," Vivian had replied. "We fell in love with the bones of the house immediately. The craftsmanship from that era is unmatched. Though of course, we did complete renovations, brought everything up to modern standards while preserving the historical integrity." "Smart," another man's voice, older, more authoritative. "This must be Charles Hendrickson Sr., the venture capitalist with the deep pockets. Respecting heritage while embracing progress. That's a valuable philosophy in business as well." "Absolutely," Lucas had agreed. "Thomas tells me you come from good family," Charles had continued. "The shipping Montgomerys, is that right? Connecticut branch?" I'd held my breath, waiting for Lucas to correct him. Instead, I'd heard my son say, "The family does have roots in shipping, yes. Though I've chosen to make my own way rather than rely on family connections." Not a lie. Not quite. But not the truth either. "Admirable," Charles had said. "Nothing wrong with old money, of course, but I respect a man who wants to build something of his own." "That's always been Lucas's way," Vivian had added. "Even though he could have taken an easier path, he's always been driven to create his own success story." I'd felt sick listening to them weave this fiction, this careful story that positioned Lucas as someone from privilege choosing to work hard, rather than what he actually was, someone from nothing who'd clawed his way up through scholarships and his mother's sacrifices. "And your family, Vivian?" Catherine Hendrickson had asked. Thomas mentioned something about real estate development. "My father was CFO for Ashford Estate Development Group before he retired," Vivian had said smoothly. "I grew up understanding how to manage substantial assets and navigate complex financial structures." More half-truths. Vivian's father had indeed worked for Ashford, but as a mid-level accountant, not the CFO. And he'd been laid off in the 2008 recession, not retired comfortably. I'd continued moving through the narrow passage, following the voices, until I'd reached a corner where the passage turned. Around that corner, I'd found myself facing yet another door, this one slightly ajar. Through it, I'd glimpsed Lucas's home office. I'd stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding. I shouldn't go in there. I had no right to snoop through my son's private office. But then I'd remembered his face when he'd closed the door on me. The cold calculation in his eyes. The way he'd dismissed my sacrifices as manipulation. The way he'd said I was making everything about myself. And I'd remembered Vivian's voice in the living room, casually rewriting history to impress wealthy investors. I'd pushed the door open and stepped inside. Lucas's office was everything else in the house was modern, expensive, carefully curated. A glass desk with chrome legs dominated the space, paired with a leather executive chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. 3 large monitors sat on the desk, currently dark. The walls were lined with floating shelves displaying business books, industry awards, and framed photographs of Lucas and Vivian at various professional events. Nothing in the office suggested I existed. No family photos. No mementos from his childhood. No evidence that he'd had any life before Vivian and this house and this carefully constructed image of success. I'd felt tears threatening again, but I'd blinked them back. I hadn't come this far to fall apart now. The filing cabinet in the corner had one drawer slightly open, as if someone had been in a hurry and hadn't quite closed it all the way. Through the gap, I could see the tabs of manila folders. My hands had been shaking as I'd pulled the drawer open fully. The folders were neatly organized, labeled in Vivian's precise handwriting: investment proposals, business plans, 2023, financial statements, quarterly, tax documents, personal, Lucas, personal, Vivian. And at the very back, M. Montgomery, private, M. Montgomery, Margaret Montgomery, me. My heart had hammered against my ribs as I'd pulled the folder out. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements, but not from any account I recognized. Loan papers with my signature, except I'd never signed them. Transfer records showing money moving between accounts I didn't have. All in my name. All completely, utterly fraudulent. I'd sank into Lucas's expensive chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me, and started reading through the documents with growing horror. According to these papers, I had multiple bank accounts with 6-figure balances. I had investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I had property holdings in Santa Barbara and Carmel. I had a trust fund established by the Montgomery shipping family, providing me with substantial annual income. None of it was real. But someone had created an entire fictional financial life for me, complete with forged documents, fabricated statements, and false records. And I was starting to understand why. With trembling hands, I'd pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every document in the folder. Page after page after page, my phone's camera capturing the evidence of what I suspected was an elaborate fraud. Through the wall, I could still hear the party. Laughter. Clinking glasses. My son's voice, smooth and confident, selling his lies to people with money. And that's when I'd heard Vivian say something that made my blood run cold. Margaret? Oh, she couldn't make it tonight. She's been feeling under the weather. Such a shame, she would have loved to meet you all. She's been so generous in supporting Lucas's venture. Family money, you know. She's always believed in investing in the next generation. I'd stared at the phone in my hand, at the photos of the fraudulent documents, and felt everything click into place. They hadn't just been hiding me to avoid embarrassment. They'd been hiding me because they'd been using my name, my identity, to commit financial fraud. And I was the only person who could prove it. I sat frozen in Lucas's office chair, my phone clutched in trembling hands, staring at the screen displaying the last photo I'd taken, a loan application bearing my forged signature for $200,000. The sounds of the party drifted through the walls like mockery, champagne glasses clinking, polite laughter, Vivian's bright voice praising the caterer's appetizers. My son was in the next room, entertaining wealthy investors while using my identity to commit fraud. And I was supposed to be hiding quietly in a back room, oblivious and compliant. The weight of what I discovered pressed down on my chest like a physical thing. I couldn't breathe properly. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my temples, in my wrists, in the base of my throat. How long had this been going on? How deep did the deception run? I forced myself to keep looking through the folder, even though every page made me feel sicker. There were bank statements dating back 18 months, showing regular deposits into accounts I'd never opened. Investment records indicating I owned stocks in companies I'd never heard of. Property tax documents for houses in Carmel and Santa Barbara that I'd never seen, let alone purchased. Someone, Lucas, Vivian, or both of them, had created an entirely fictional financial identity for me. They'd made me wealthy on paper, given me assets and accounts and property that existed only in forged documents. But why? I pulled out another folder, this one labeled, Investment Pitch, Hendrickson Capital. Inside was a glossy presentation binder, the kind that cost a small fortune to produce. I flipped it open and began reading. The pitch was for Lucas's software company, Datacore Analytics. According to the presentation, the company needed $10 million in Series B funding to scale operations and expand into new markets. The technology was sound, I didn't understand half of it, but the charts and projections looked impressive. But it was the section on founding team and financial backing that made my hands start shaking again. There, on page 12, was a photograph of Lucas that I'd never seen before, professionally shot, him in a suit, standing in front of a bookshelf. The caption read, Lucas Montgomery, founder and CEO. Stanford University, BA in Computer Science. Former senior analyst at Mercer Consulting Group. Backed by family investment from Montgomery Family Trust. Family investment from Montgomery Family Trust. I flipped ahead, finding more details. According to the pitch deck, the Montgomery Family Trust had provided $500,000 in seed capital to start the company. The trust was described as established wealth from 3 generations in the shipping and logistics industry, now managed by Margaret Montgomery, family matriarch and Lucas's primary financial backer. Me. They'd made me the source of money that didn't exist. But I understood now why they needed the documentation. If Charles Hendrickson Sr. was as thorough as his reputation suggested, he wouldn't just take Lucas's word about family money. He would want proof. Bank statements. Trust documents. Evidence that the Montgomery family really did have the kind of wealth that could produce $500,000 in seed capital without breaking a sweat. And that's exactly what Lucas and Vivian had created, a paper trail showing that I, Margaret Montgomery, was a woman of substantial means who had generously funded her son's startup venture. The only problem was that every single document was a lie. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the office and my heart stopped. I quickly closed the folder, slipped it back into the filing cabinet exactly where I'd found it, and looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. The footsteps passed by, probably just someone looking for a bathroom. But the near miss reminded me that I was in dangerous territory. If Lucas or Vivian discovered me in here, going through their files, there was no telling how they might react. I needed to get out of the office. But I also needed more information. Moving as quietly as possible, I pulled out my phone again and opened the Notepad app. I started making notes, account numbers, names of banks, dates of supposed transactions, anything that might be useful later. My arthritic fingers fumbled over the small keyboard, but I forced myself to be thorough. While I typed, I continued listening to the party through the wall. Impressed with the scalability model, Charles Hendrickson's voice was saying. But I'll be frank with you, Lucas. We've seen promising tech companies before. The question isn't whether your product works. We believe it does. The question is whether you have the financial runway to weather the inevitable challenges that come with rapid growth. We absolutely do, Lucas replied, and I could hear the confidence in his voice. The same confidence he'd had as a boy when he'd promised me he'd gotten an A on a test he'd actually failed. Between our existing capital reserves and the backing we have from family investment, we're in a strong position to sustain operations even if revenue projections take longer to materialize than expected. That family backing, Charles said. Thomas mentioned your mother has been a significant investor? Yes, sir. My mother established a trust fund years ago, primarily from her inheritance from the Montgomery shipping interests. She's been incredibly supportive of my entrepreneurial goals. I closed my eyes, feeling physically ill. He was saying it all so smoothly, so convincingly. As if he really believed his own lies. That kind of family support is invaluable, Charles said. Shows strong family bonds. I like to see that in the entrepreneurs we back. Too many young founders these days have burned bridges with their families, created chaos in their personal lives. A man who has his mother's trust and support, that says something about character. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Here was Charles Hendrickson praising Lucas's character based on a complete fabrication, while the real mother, the one who'd actually sacrificed everything for her son, was hidden in a back room like shameful secret. My mother has always believed in me, Lucas said, and the sad thing was, that part was true. I had always believed in him. Right up until about an hour ago when I discovered he was using my name to commit financial fraud. Well, I'd love to meet her sometime, Charles said. Perhaps we could arrange a lunch, discuss her perspective on the investment opportunity. In my experience, the family investors often have insights that the founders themselves might miss. There was the briefest pause, and then Vivian's voice cut in smoothly. Margaret would love that, I'm sure. Though she does travel quite extensively. She splits her time between Santa Barbara and Carmel, the family properties, you know. We'll definitely coordinate schedules once you've had a chance to review the full proposal. More lies. Layers upon layers of them. I carefully returned everything to exactly how I'd found it, then eased the filing cabinet drawer shut. I took one last look around the office, making sure I hadn't left any evidence of my presence, then slipped back through the door into the servants' passage. My hands were still shaking. My mind was racing. I needed time to think, to process what I discovered, to figure out what to do next. The passage led me back toward the small room where I was supposed to be hiding. As I approached it, I heard voices coming from the kitchen, caterers discussing the timing for the main course service. Table 6 wants their steaks medium rare, not medium, one voice said. And someone needs to check if they need more champagne at the bar, another added. Has anyone seen that homemade cake? Mrs. Montgomery wanted it removed from sight. I think James put it in the garage fridge. Didn't fit the aesthetic, apparently. My cake. The one connection I'd tried to maintain to my son, to the boy he'd been before money and ambition had transformed him into someone I no longer recognized. Hidden away in the garage like it was garbage. Like I was garbage. I slipped back into the small room and sat down on the edge of the narrow cot. My entire body felt heavy, exhausted not from physical exertion but from the weight of betrayal. For the next 20 minutes, I sat there in the semi-darkness, lit only by the glow of my phone, thinking about what to do. The evidence I'd photographed was damning. Lucas and Vivian had created an elaborate fiction about my financial status, forged documents in my name, and were actively using that false information to secure a $10 million investment from Charles Hendrickson. That was fraud. Serious fraud. The kind that could result in criminal charges. But Lucas was my son. Despite everything, despite the lies, the dismissal, the willingness to hide me away like I was something to be ashamed of, he was still my son. The baby I'd nursed. The child I'd raised. The young man I'd sacrificed my retirement for. Could I really turn him in to the authorities? Could I really destroy his life, his marriage, his business, everything he'd worked for? The answer came to me with startling clarity. What he'd worked for was built on lies and theft. It wasn't real success. It was a house of cards that would inevitably collapse, probably taking innocent people down with it. People like Charles Hendrickson, who was about to invest $10 million based on fraudulent information. I couldn't let that happen. Whatever my complicated feelings about Lucas, I couldn't stand by and watch him defraud an innocent investor. But confronting them now, in the middle of the party, would be disastrous. It would humiliate Lucas in front of the very people he was trying to impress, potentially destroying the business even if it could somehow be salvaged. And more importantly, if Lucas and Vivian realized I knew about their fraud, they might destroy the evidence before I could do anything about it. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed a plan. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my oldest friend, Dorothy Brennan. Dorothy and I had worked together at Riverside Public Library for over 20 years before we'd both retired. She was sharp, practical, and, most relevantly, her son was a lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime. The text was simple: Dorothy, I need to talk to you urgently. Are you available tomorrow morning? It's about Lucas. Something serious has come up. Her response came within 2 minutes. Of course, sweetheart. Come to my house at 9 a.m. I'll make coffee. Is everything okay? I typed back, not really. But it will be. Thank you. With that settled, I turned my attention to the immediate problem, getting through the rest of this evening without Lucas or Vivian realizing I'd discovered their secret. Through the wall, I could hear the party moving into its next phase. The sounds of dining, clatter of silverware, murmurs of appreciation for the food, wine being poured into glasses. This beef tenderloin is magnificent, Catherine Hendrickson was saying. We're fortunate to have an excellent relationship with a local butcher, Vivian replied. Sourcing quality ingredients is so important. The conversation continued, idle chatter about food, wine, the weather, San Francisco versus Los Angeles, the usual topics that affluent people discussed at dinner parties. I checked my watch. It was nearly 8:30 p.m. I'd been in this house for 3 hours, and at least 2 of those had been spent hidden away like an inconvenient piece of furniture. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. Mrs. Montgomery, this is James Chen from Datacore Analytics. I'm Lucas's business operations manager. I apologize for reaching out on a Saturday evening, but there's an urgent matter I need to discuss with you regarding some financial documents. Would it be possible to arrange a call on Monday morning? My number is 5550198. Thank you. My blood went cold. James Chen. I remembered that name from some of the documents I'd photographed. He'd been listed as a witness on several of the forged financial statements. Either he was part of the fraud, or he discovered something was wrong and was trying to reach out to me to verify information. I stared at the text for a long moment, my mind racing. If James was suspicious, that meant the fraud might already be unraveling. Which meant Lucas and Vivian were potentially in even more danger than I'd realized. And if James was complicit, this text might be a trap, a way to figure out what I knew and how much of a threat I posed to their scheme. I didn't respond to the text. Not yet. Not until I'd had a chance to talk to Dorothy and her lawyer son. Time crawled by. Through the wall, I heard the party progressing through dessert, then coffee, then after-dinner drinks. Conversations grew louder, more animated, the sound of people relaxing after good food and wine. At one point, I heard Charles Hendrickson say, "Lucas, I have to tell you, I'm impressed. You and Vivian have built something special here, not just the business, but the whole package. The home, the lifestyle, the evident success. It speaks to discipline and good decision-making. Thank you, sir. That means a great deal coming from you. I'm going to recommend to the investment committee that we move forward with the full $10 million. I'll want our attorneys to review all the documentation, of course, but I don't anticipate any problems. Assuming everything checks out, and I have no reason to believe it won't, we should be able to close the deal within 60 days. Through the wall, I heard Lucas and Vivian's exclamations of excitement, the congratulations from the other guests, the sound of more champagne being opened to celebrate. $10 million. Based on lies. Based on forged documents bearing my name and my forged signature. I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, seeing the collision coming but powerless to stop it. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I finally heard the guests beginning to leave. Protracted goodbyes in the foyer, promises to follow up early next week, more congratulations and well wishes. "We'll be in touch on Monday with our attorneys," Charles Hendrickson said. "They'll want copies of all your financial documentation, capitalization tables, investment agreements, trust documents, everything. Standard due diligence." "Of course," Lucas said. "We'll have everything prepared." More goodbyes. Car doors closing. Engines starting. The crunch of gravel as expensive vehicles pulled out of the driveway. And then, finally, silence. I heard Vivian's voice, no longer bright and performative but exhausted. "Oh, thank God that's over. My feet are killing me." "You were perfect," Lucas said. "Absolutely perfect." "Did you hear what Charles said? $10 million. We're actually going to pull this off." "We still need to get through due diligence," Vivian cautioned. "That's going to be the tricky part. We need to make sure all our documentation is absolutely airtight." "It is. I've been over every detail a dozen times." "What about James?" "He's been asking questions about some of the financial statements." My ears perked up at that. So James' chin was suspicious. "James is a problem we'll deal with if we have to," Lucas said, and there was something cold in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Right now, let's just enjoy this. We're about to be worth millions." "What about your mother?" Vivian asked. "Do we need to go check on her? Pretend we care?" Lucas laughed. Actually laughed. "Honestly? I'm exhausted. Let's just let her see herself out. I'll call her tomorrow and apologize, tell her the party ran longer than expected or something." "You're terrible," Vivian said, but she sounded amused rather than critical. "I learned from the best," Lucas replied. I heard their footsteps moving toward the staircase, heading up to their bedroom on the second floor. Apparently, they'd decided I wasn't even worth the effort of a fake apology tonight. I waited in the small room for another 15 minutes, making sure they were truly settled for the night. Then I quietly opened the door and made my way back through the house. The living room and dining room were disasters: empty champagne bottles, used plates that the caterers had stacked but not yet removed, wine glasses with red residue marking the table. The detritus of Lucas and Vivian's performance, their successful con. I walked through the kitchen and out the side door that led to the garage. My cake was there, exactly where the caterers had said, shoved in the back of the garage refrigerator, still in its carrier, untouched and unwanted. I took it with me. Then I went to my car, got in, and sat there in the darkness for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. My son had used me. Had forged my signature. Had created an entire fictional financial identity for me. Had hidden me away like I was something shameful. Had laughed about dismissing me. And yet, part of me, that stubborn, irrational part that couldn't stop being a mother no matter how much it hurt, still wanted to protect him. But I couldn't. Not this time. Not when his crimes would hurt innocent people. I started the car and drove away from that beautiful house in Belmont Heights, leaving behind the son I'd raised and loved, and the stranger he'd become. The drive back to my apartment in Santa Monica felt endless. The freeways were relatively clear at this late hour, but my mind was racing so fast that I could barely concentrate on the road. Several times I had to force myself to focus, to pay attention to lane markers and traffic lights instead of the endless loop of betrayal playing in my head. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex's parking lot, it was nearly midnight. The building was quiet, most of my neighbors already asleep. I carried my cake carrier up the stairs to my second-floor unit, my arthritic knees protesting every step. Inside my small apartment, I set the cake on the kitchen counter and just stared at it for a long moment. All that effort. All that hope. All that love baked into layers of lemon and cream cheese frosting. And it had meant nothing. Less than nothing. It had been an inconvenience, something that didn't fit the aesthetic. I was 70 years old, and I had never felt more alone in my entire life. But I didn't cry. I was past crying. Instead, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat down at my small kitchen table with my phone, reviewing all the photos I'd taken of the fraudulent documents. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Lucas and Vivian had created an entire fictional financial empire in my name, complete with bank accounts, investment portfolios, and property holdings. They'd forged my signature on loan applications, trust documents, and investment agreements. And they were actively using this false information to secure a $10 million investment from Charles Hendrickson. I spent the next 2 hours organizing the photos into folders on my phone, making notes about dates and amounts, trying to piece together the full scope of the fraud. The more I looked, the worse it got. According to the forged documents, I supposedly had 3 bank accounts with a combined balance of over $800,000, investment portfolios worth approximately $1.2 million, 2 properties in California, Santa Barbara and Carmel, valued at a combined $3.5 million, a trust fund established by the Montgomery family that provided $150,000 in annual income. In reality, I had 1 checking account with a balance of about $3,200, 1 savings account with approximately $12,000, what was left of my emergency fund after lending Lucas the $50,000, Social Security income of $1,800 per month, a small pension from the library of $900 per month, no property, no trust fund, no connection to Montgomery shipping money. The total fictional net worth they'd created for me was approximately $5.5 million. I was supposedly a wealthy woman. In reality, I was barely making ends meet in a 1-bedroom apartment, trying to stretch my fixed income to cover rent, utilities, and groceries. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook me and I fell into bed. But sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucas's face, the way he'd looked at me when he'd closed the door on that small room. Not apologetic. Not even guilty. Just dismissive. Like I was a problem he'd successfully managed. I must have eventually dozed off because I woke with a start at 7:30 a.m., disoriented and still fully dressed from the night before. Sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window, and for just a moment, I thought maybe the previous evening had been a nightmare. Then I saw my phone on the nightstand, still showing the folder of photos I'd taken of the fraudulent documents. Not a nightmare. Real. I dragged myself out of bed, my joints stiff and aching more than usual, probably from all the stress. I showered, put on clean clothes, and forced myself to eat some toast even though I had no appetite. At 8:45 a.m., I got in my car and drove to Dorothy's house in Pasadena. Dorothy had been my closest friend for over 30 years. We'd started at the Riverside Public Library on the same day, both young women in our 30s trying to build careers while navigating the challenges of motherhood. She'd been there through Richard's heart attacks and eventual death, through Lucas's childhood and adolescence, through all my ups and downs. If anyone would know what to do, it was Dorothy. She answered the door before I'd even finished knocking, her face creased with concern. Dorothy was my age, 70, with short gray hair she kept in a practical bob and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Margaret," she said, pulling me into a hug before I'd even stepped inside. "You look terrible. What's happened?" I followed her into her cozy living room, so different from Lucas and Vivian's sterile showpiece. Dorothy's house was filled with comfortable, worn furniture, bookshelves crammed with paperbacks, and family photos covering every available surface. "Coffee first," Dorothy said firmly. "Then you'll tell me everything." Over the next hour, sitting at her kitchen table with mugs of strong coffee, I told her the whole story. The party invitation. Being hidden in the back room. The servants' passage. Lucas's office and the filing cabinet. The forged documents creating a fictional financial identity for me. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "That son of a bitch," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Margaret, I know he's your son, but that's financial fraud on a massive scale." I know, I said, and hearing her confirm it out loud made it feel more real, more terrifying. I don't know what to do, Dorothy. He's my son, but what he's doing, it's not just wrong, it's criminal. And if I don't stop him, he's going to defraud Charles Hendrickson out of $10 million. Show me the photos, Dorothy said. I pulled out my phone and handed it to her. She spent the next 15 minutes scrolling through the images, her expression growing grimmer with each one. This is sophisticated fraud, she said finally. These aren't amateurish forgeries. Someone put a lot of time and effort into creating these documents. They look legitimate. What should I do? Dorothy set down my phone and looked at me directly. You need to talk to my son. Michael specializes in exactly this kind of white-collar crime. He'll know what your options are, both legally and practically. I don't want to send Lucas to prison, I said, and felt tears finally beginning to sting my eyes. He's my son, Dorothy. Despite everything, I don't want to destroy his life. Margaret, honey, listen to me. Dorothy reached across the table and took my hand. Lucas is destroying his own life. What you'd be doing is stopping him before he destroys other people's lives too. Charles Hendrickson isn't just some nameless corporation. He's a real person who's about to lose $10 million because your son is lying to him. You wouldn't be betraying Lucas. You'd be saving him from himself. What if there's another way? What if I confront him directly, give him a chance to come clean and make this right? Dorothy's expression was skeptical. From what you've told me, does Lucas sound like someone who would admit to fraud and voluntarily give up a $10 million investment? He hid you in a back room because he was embarrassed by you. He laughed about it with his wife. Does that sound like someone with a functioning conscience? She was right. I knew she was right. But it still hurt to hear it said out loud. Let me call Michael, Dorothy said. He's probably at home today. Sundays are usually his family days. But I know he'll want to talk to you about this immediately. This is time sensitive, Margaret. From what you've described, the due diligence process is starting tomorrow. Once Hendrickson's attorneys start examining the documents, they might discover the fraud. Or they might not. If these forgeries are as good as they look, they might pass initial scrutiny. Either way, you need legal advice, and you need it now. I nodded, feeling numb. Dorothy made the call. Her son, Michael, answered on the second ring, and I could hear his voice through the phone, concerned, professional, immediately serious when Dorothy explained the situation. Tell her to come to my office, Michael said. I'll meet her there in 45 minutes. And Mom? Tell her to bring her phone with all those photos. This is serious enough that we might need to involve law enforcement today. Law enforcement. The police. Potentially the FBI, since this involved interstate fraud and federal banking regulations. My son might be arrested because of evidence I was providing. The thought made me feel physically ill, but I forced myself to nod. Dorothy was right. Michael was right. I couldn't let Lucas defraud an innocent investor, no matter what it cost me personally. Thank you, I said to Dorothy, my voice cracking. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, Dorothy said firmly. You always do. You're one of the strongest people I know, Margaret. And you're doing the right thing, even though it's hard. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in Michael Brennan's law office in downtown Los Angeles, a sleek suite on the 18th floor of a glass tower. Michael was in his mid-40s, with his mother's kind eyes but his father's no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to my story with the same attention Dorothy had shown, but his focus was more clinical, more professional. He took notes. He asked specific questions about dates, amounts, and exactly what documents I'd seen. When I showed him the photos on my phone, his expression grew grave. Mrs. Montgomery, he said, what your son and daughter-in-law have done is serious federal fraud. Identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, securities fraud. We're looking at potential prison sentences of 10 to 20 years if they're convicted. The room seemed to spin. 20 years? These are federal crimes involving substantial amounts of money. The courts don't treat them lightly. And the fact that your son used your identity, his own mother's identity, to commit the fraud might actually make it worse, not better. Judges tend to view familial exploitation as particularly egregious. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. I don't want him to go to prison for 20 years. He's my son. Michael's expression softened. I understand, Mrs. Montgomery. And I want you to know that you have options here. But I need you to understand something. If you do nothing, your son is going to commit a massive fraud against Charles Hendrickson. When, not if, but when, that fraud is discovered, it will all come crashing down anyway. Lucas and Vivian will still face criminal charges. The only difference is that by then, they'll have victimized an innocent investor, and the charges will be even more serious. So I'm choosing between turning him in now or watching him destroy himself later? Essentially, yes. But I think there might be a third option. I looked up at him, hope flickering in my chest. What option? Confrontation with consequences, Michael said. We arrange a meeting with Lucas and Vivian, present them with the evidence you've collected, and give them a choice: voluntarily withdraw from the Hendrickson deal, return all fraudulently obtained money, shut down the false accounts, and agree to monitored probation, or face immediate criminal prosecution. Would that work? It might. It depends on how rational your son is capable of being when faced with the reality of his crimes. Some white-collar criminals, when confronted with undeniable evidence, will take the deal to avoid prison. Others double down, try to brazen their way through, and end up making things worse. What would monitored probation mean? It would mean Lucas and Vivian agree to regular audits of their finances, restrictions on their business activities, possible restitution payments to anyone they've defrauded, and the understanding that any future violation results in immediate prosecution with no plea deals available. It sounded like a lifeline. A way to stop the fraud without destroying Lucas's life completely. But Mrs. Montgomery, Michael continued, and his tone made it clear there was a catch. This only works if Lucas and Vivian cooperate fully. If they refuse, or if they try to hide assets or continue the fraud, you'll need to be prepared to follow through with criminal charges. Can you do that? Could I? Could I actually send my own son to prison if he refused to make things right? I thought about Charles Hendrickson, about to lose $10 million. I thought about Lucas's business manager, James Chen, who had sent me that text, probably suspicious about the fraud, potentially at risk of being implicated himself if he'd unknowingly signed off on false documents. I thought about all the other people who might be hurt by Lucas's crimes if they were allowed to continue. And I thought about Lucas himself, the boy I'd raised, who had once been kind and honest and hard-working before wealth and ambition had corrupted him into someone capable of forging his own mother's signature and laughing about hiding her in a back room. Yes, I said finally. If it comes to that, I'll follow through with criminal charges. Michael nodded approvingly. Then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a formal letter outlining exactly what we know, what evidence we have, and what consequences Lucas faces if he doesn't cooperate. We'll schedule a meeting for tomorrow, Monday, at my office. You'll bring Lucas and Vivian here under the pretense of discussing some family financial matters. Then I'll present them with the evidence and the choice. They'll deny everything. Initially, probably. That's why the evidence is so important. The photos you took are damning. Once they realize we have documented proof of their fraud, they'll understand they can't lie their way out of this. What if they get angry? What if they... I trailed off, not sure what I was even afraid of. Michael's expression was kind but firm. Mrs. Montgomery, I've handled hundreds of these cases. The confrontation will be difficult, but it will be controlled. And at the end of it, one way or another, this fraud will stop. That's what matters. I nodded, feeling exhausted and sad and older than my 70 years. Go home and rest, Michael said. I'll prepare everything for tomorrow's meeting. I need you to call Lucas this evening and tell him you need to meet with him urgently tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. at my office. Tell him it's about some important financial documents that need his signature. Keep it vague. We don't want him to suspect what's coming. What if he refuses to come? Then we move directly to involving law enforcement. But I don't think he'll refuse. Based on what you've told me, Lucas still wants to maintain some pretense of being a dutiful son. He'll come if you tell him it's important. I left Michael's office feeling drained but slightly more hopeful than I'd felt since discovering the fraud. There was a plan now. A path forward that didn't immediately destroy Lucas's life but still stop the fraud. Whether Lucas would take that path or force me to choose the other option, criminal prosecution, remained to be seen. I spent the rest of Sunday in my apartment, rehearsing what I would say to Lucas when I called him. I needed to sound normal, not angry or suspicious. Just a mother asking her son for help with some paperwork. At 6 p.m., I finally made the call. Lucas answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, Mom. I was just about to call you. I wanted to apologize about last night. The party ran really late and I figured you'd probably already headed home. I hope you weren't too bored in the back room." Too bored. As if boredom had been the problem. "It's fine, Lucas," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I do need to talk to you about something important. Are you and Vivian available tomorrow morning? Around 11 a.m.? Tomorrow? What's this about?" "There are some financial documents I need you to look at. Papers that require your signature. It's regarding some family matters." I could hear the suspicion in his voice. "What kind of family matters?" "Just some estate planning things. Nothing to worry about, but it needs to be handled soon. There's a lawyer's office in downtown LA where we can meet. His name is Michael Brennan, and he's helped me with some paperwork. Can't this wait until next week? Tomorrow's pretty packed with the Hendrickson deal moving forward." "It really can't wait," I said firmly. "Lucas, I've never asked you for much. I'm asking you for this. 1 hour tomorrow morning. Please." There was a long pause. Then, "Fine. Text me the address. But I can't promise Vivian will be able to make it. She's got meetings scheduled all day. I need both of you there, Lucas. This concerns both of you." Another pause. "Okay. I'll make it work. Is everything all right, Mom? You sound strange." "Everything's fine," I lied. "I just need to get these documents handled. That's all." "Okay. Text me the address. We'll be there at 11 o'clock. After I hung up, I sat there holding my phone, feeling like I'd just set something irreversible in motion. Tomorrow, at 11 a.m., my son would walk into Michael Brennan's office expecting to sign some routine paperwork. Instead, he'd be confronted with evidence of his crimes and given a choice that would determine the rest of his life. And I would be there, watching the moment when he realized his mother knew everything. I didn't sleep at all that night. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep, my mind churning through every possible scenario of how the confrontation might unfold. Would Lucas be angry? Defensive? Would he try to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty for exposing his crimes? Or would he finally, show some remorse for what he'd done? I made coffee I couldn't drink and toast I couldn't eat. My hands shook as I tried to apply makeup, eventually giving up after the third attempt at eyeliner. What did it matter how I looked? This wasn't a social occasion. This was the day I would either save my son from himself or lose him entirely. At 9:30 a.m., I received a text from Michael Brennan, "Everything is ready. I've prepared comprehensive documentation. When Lucas and Vivian arrive, let me handle the initial presentation. Your role is to be present and to confirm the facts when asked. Stay strong, Mrs. Montgomery. You're doing the right thing." The right thing. Why did the right thing have to hurt so much? I dressed in a simple gray pantsuit, the one I used to wear to important library board meetings when I needed to project authority. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a 70-year-old woman who looked every day of her age. The stress of the past 2 days had etched new lines around my eyes, and my skin had a grayish pallor that no amount of makeup could hide. But my eyes were clear. Determined. Whatever happened today, I would see it through. I arrived at Michael's office building at 10:30 a.m., giving myself time to collect my thoughts before Lucas and Vivian arrived. The building was impressive, all glass and steel, with a marble lobby and security guards who checked IDs before allowing visitors to the elevators. Michael met me in the reception area of his 18th floor office suite. He was dressed in a dark suit that radiated professional authority, and his expression was kind but serious. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm here," I said. "That's about all I can manage right now." "That's enough. Come on, I'll show you the conference room where we'll be meeting." The conference room was designed to intimidate: a long mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of downtown Los Angeles stretching to the distant ocean. On the table was a thick binder, several file folders, and a laptop computer. "I've printed copies of all the evidence," Michael said, gesturing to the folders. "Bank statements, loan documents, forged trust papers, investment records, everything. I've also prepared a summary document that outlines the legal exposure Lucas and Vivian face if they choose not to cooperate." "How bad is it?" I asked. Michael's expression was grim. "Federal sentencing guidelines for this type and magnitude of fraud suggest 15 to 20 years in prison for each of them, with potential fines in excess of $1 million. And that's assuming they're convicted on only the most obvious charges. If prosecutors decide to add additional charges, conspiracy, money laundering, securities fraud, the exposure gets worse." I felt my legs weaken and grabbed the back of a chair for support. 20 years. The alternative we're offering, monitored probation, restitution, business restrictions, is incredibly generous under the circumstances. If they're rational, they'll take it immediately. And if they're not rational? Then we file criminal complaints this afternoon, and they'll be arrested within 48 hours. The intercom on the conference room phone buzzed. "Mr. Brennan, your 11 a.m. appointment has arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison are in reception." Michael looked at me. "Are you ready?" Was I? Was anyone ever ready to potentially destroy their child's life, even if it was to save them from destroying it themselves? "Yes," I said, because there was no other answer possible now. "Remember, let me do most of the talking initially. You're here as a witness and a victim. When I ask you direct questions, answer honestly but briefly. Don't let Lucas manipulate you emotionally. He's going to try." I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. Michael pressed the intercom button. "Send them in, please." The next 30 seconds felt like an eternity. I heard footsteps in the hallway, voices, Lucas saying something to Vivian, her responding with a laugh, and then the conference room door opened. Lucas walked in first, looking expensive and confident in a charcoal gray suit. Vivian followed, dressed in a cream-colored designer dress and heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They both looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate lifestyle magazine, successful, polished, untouchable. Their expressions when they saw me sitting there at the conference table were priceless. Lucas's confident smile faltered. Vivian's eyes narrowed with instant suspicion. "Mom?" Lucas said. "What's going on? I thought you needed help with some paperwork." "Please, sit down," Michael said, his voice professional and commanding. "I'm Michael Brennan, Mrs. Montgomery's attorney. We have some serious matters to discuss with you both." "Her attorney?" Vivian's voice was sharp. "What is this about?" "Sit down," Michael repeated, and this time it wasn't a request. Something in his tone must have penetrated because Lucas and Vivian exchanged a glance, then slowly took seats on the opposite side of the table from me and Michael. "I don't understand what's happening," Lucas said, but I could see awareness beginning to dawn in his eyes. Fear, carefully hidden but definitely there. Michael opened the first folder and slid it across the table. "What's happening, Mr. Morrison, is that your mother has discovered your fraud. And before you insult everyone's intelligence by denying it, I want you to look at the documents in front of you." Lucas picked up the folder with hands that I noticed were trembling slightly. Vivian leaned over to look as well. As they flipped through the pages, copies of the forged bank statements, the fake trust documents, the falsified investment records. I watched the color drain from both their faces. Where did you get these? Vivian asked, her voice tight. From your filing cabinet, I said quietly. Saturday night, while I was hidden in your back room, I found the servants' passage. It led to Lucas's office. I saw everything. You went through my private files? Lucas's shock was transforming into anger. You invaded my privacy, you forged my signature. I cut him off, my voice stronger than I felt. You created fake bank accounts in my name. You invented an entire fictional financial identity for me and used it to commit fraud. Don't you dare talk to me about violations. Michael held up a hand. Let's focus on the facts. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, the documents in front of you are copies of fraudulent financial records you created using Margaret Montgomery's identity. These documents were used to falsely represent your company's backing to potential investors, specifically Charles Hendrickson of Hendrickson Capital. This is ridiculous, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. These could be fabricated. This could be some kind of setup. Michael opened his laptop and turned it to face them. These are photographs taken by Mrs. Montgomery on Saturday night, showing the original documents in your filing cabinet. Note the timestamp and location data embedded in the image files. Note also the visible portions of your office visible in the background of some photos, your distinctive glass desk, the awards on your shelves. These are authentic images of authentic fraud. Lucas stared at the laptop screen, and I watched him realize there was no way out. No plausible deniability. No clever explanation that would make this go away. Mom, he said, turning to me, and his voice had changed, softer now, pleading. Please, let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. You used my name to commit fraud. You forged my signature on documents claiming I had millions of dollars in assets. You told potential investors that I was funding your company with family money that doesn't exist. And you did all of this while hiding me in a back room because you were ashamed of who I actually am. I was never ashamed of you. You literally hid me in a back room, Lucas. You told people I couldn't attend the party because I was under the weather, while I was sitting 20 feet away, ordered to stay out of sight. Don't lie to me anymore. I'm done with lies. Vivian's tactical mind seemed to be working through options. What do you want? Money? Is this blackmail? Michael's laugh was sharp and humorless. Mrs. Morrison, your mother-in-law doesn't want money from you. She wants to prevent you from committing a major federal crime and potentially destroying innocent people's lives in the process. We haven't committed any crimes, Vivian insisted. Those documents were just preliminary. We were exploring different scenarios for presenting our financials to investors. You forged bank statements, Michael said flatly. You created false trust documents. You invented property holdings that don't exist. And you were about to use all of this false information to secure a $10 million investment. That's not exploring scenarios. That's multiple felonies including identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and securities fraud. Lucas had been sitting silently, his head in his hands. Now he looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine fear. Mom, please. If this comes out, it will destroy everything. The business, the house, our reputation, everything we've worked for will be gone. Everything you've worked for was built on lies, I said. It was never real, Lucas. But it could be real, he said desperately. The business model is sound. The technology works. We just needed the investment to scale properly. And yes, maybe we exaggerated some details about our backing, but the core business is legitimate. Exaggerated? My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. You didn't exaggerate, Lucas. You committed fraud. You forged my signature on documents claiming I had property worth $3.5 million. You invented bank accounts with hundreds of thousands of dollars. You created an entire fictional trust fund. That's not exaggeration. That's criminal fraud. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. We're not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who doesn't understand how business works in the real world. Lucas, we should leave. This is clearly some kind of shakedown. Sit down, Mrs. Morrison, Michael said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. Because I need to make sure you both understand something very clearly. If you walk out of this office right now without addressing this situation, I will file criminal complaints with the FBI before the end of business today. You will be arrested, probably tomorrow morning. Your homes will be searched. Your assets will be frozen. Your names will be in the news. And you will very likely spend the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison. That got through. Vivian slowly sank back into her chair, her face pale. However, Michael continued, Mrs. Montgomery has asked me to offer you an alternative. One chance, and it is only one chance, to make this right without destroying your lives completely. What alternative? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael slid another document across the table. This is a proposed agreement. If you sign it, you agree to the following terms. 1. You immediately withdraw from the Hendrickson investment deal with a plausible explanation that doesn't involve fraud. 2. You return the $50,000 that Mrs. Montgomery loaned you from her retirement fund. 3. You shut down all fraudulent accounts and destroy all false documentation. 4. You submit to quarterly financial audits for the next 5 years. 5. You accept restrictions on your business activities, specifically prohibiting you from seeking investments based on false financial information. And 6. You both agree that any future violation results in immediate criminal prosecution with no opportunity for plea deals. And if we don't sign? Vivian asked. Then Mrs. Montgomery and I walk straight from this office to the FBI field office downtown, and by this afternoon, federal agents will be knocking on your door with arrest warrants. Lucas looked at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, you wouldn't really do that to your own son, would you? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. He was betting that my love for him would override everything else, the fraud, the lies, the casual cruelty of hiding me away. He was betting that I would always choose him over what was right. And maybe the old Margaret, the one who'd existed before Saturday night, would have. But I wasn't that person anymore. Yes, I said simply. If you force me to choose between protecting you and protecting the innocent people you're about to defraud, I will choose them. Because that's what a parent with actual integrity does, Lucas. They teach their children that actions have consequences. And if you won't learn that lesson voluntarily, I'll make sure you learn it the hard way. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a crack in his facade, a glimpse of the boy he used to be before ambition and greed had corrupted him. How did we get here? He asked, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely confused rather than defensive. How did everything go so wrong? You made choices, I said. You chose to forge my signature. You chose to create false documents. You chose to hide me in a back room because I didn't fit the image you wanted to project. Every step of this, you made a choice. And now you have one more choice to make. Vivian was reading through the proposed agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line. These terms are insane. Quarterly audits. Business restrictions. We'd never be able to raise capital with these limitations. Then you'll need to build your business the legitimate way, Michael said. Through actual revenue and organic growth. Like millions of other entrepreneurs do every day without committing fraud. And if we refuse? Vivian asked again. I've already answered that question, Mrs. Morrison. Federal prison. Lucas reached for the document and read through it carefully. I watched emotions play across his face, anger, fear, resentment, and finally, something that might have been resignation. Vivian, he said quietly. We need to sign this. No, she said immediately. This is a bluff. She's not actually going to turn in her own son. We should call her on it. It's not a bluff, Lucas said, still looking at me. Look at her face, Viv. She means it. She'll really do it. Then she's a terrible mother. Stop, Lucas cut her off. Just stop. This is my fault. I did this. I forged the documents. I created the fake accounts. I pitched the Hendrickson deal based on false information. And yes, Mom's right, I hid her away because I was ashamed that she didn't fit the image I was trying to project. It was the first honest thing I'd heard him say in years. Lucas, we can fight this, Vivian insisted. We can hire lawyers, with what money? Lucas asked, his voice hollow. We're leveraged to the max. The house is mortgaged. Our credit cards are maxed out. We've been living on credit and the assumption that the Hendrickson deal would come through. If we have to hire criminal defense attorneys, we're bankrupt within a month. And we'd still probably end up in prison. He looked at Michael. If we sign this agreement, do we avoid criminal charges? As long as you comply with all terms, yes. The moment you violate any provision, Mrs. Montgomery is free to pursue prosecution. But if you genuinely commit to making this right, you can walk away from this without a criminal record. Lucas picked up the pen that Michael had placed on the table. His hand hovered over the signature line for a long moment. Don't do this, Vivian said. Lucas, this will ruin us. We ruined ourselves, Lucas said quietly. The moment we decided fraud was acceptable if it got us what we wanted. Mom's just making sure we don't take anyone else down with us. He signed the document, his signature looking shaky and small. Vivian stared at him in disbelief. You're really doing this? Sign it, Vivian, Lucas said. Or I'll face charges alone and testify that you were the one who actually created the forged documents. It was a lie, I'd seen enough to know they'd both been involved, but it was enough to break Vivian's resistance. She grabbed the pen and signed with angry, sharp strokes. Michael collected the document and made copies for everyone. I'll file this with my office records immediately. Remember, quarterly audits begin in 3 months. I'll need complete access to all business and personal financial records. Any discrepancies, any attempts to hide assets or income, and this agreement is void. We understand, Lucas said. And the $50,000 that Mrs. Montgomery loaned you needs to be returned within 30 days. Lucas's face fell. I don't have it. We spent it on business development and living expenses. Then you have 30 days to find it, Michael said flatly. Sell something. Take out a legitimate loan. Get a second job. I don't care how you do it, but that money goes back to Mrs. Montgomery within 30 days or you're in violation. Understood, Lucas said, sounding defeated. Michael stood, signaling the meeting was over. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, I suggest you both take some time to think very seriously about your choices. You've been given an extraordinary opportunity to avoid prison and rebuild your lives legitimately. Don't waste it. Lucas and Vivian stood slowly, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past hour. As they walked toward the door, Lucas paused and turned back to me. Mom, he started, then stopped, seeming to run out of words. What? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. I'm sorry. For all of it. The fraud, hiding you at the party, the things I said. I'm sorry. I looked at my son, this man who'd committed crimes using my identity, who'd laughed about dismissing me, who'd built his entire life on lies, and I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just a vast emptiness where a relationship used to be. I'm sorry too, I said quietly. I'm sorry that somewhere along the way, I failed to teach you that integrity matters more than success. That people matter more than money. That your mother deserved better than to be hidden away like something shameful. You didn't fail me, Lucas said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. I failed you. I failed myself. Yes, I agreed. You did. Is there any way we can fix this? Fix us? I thought about that question for a long moment. Could we fix our relationship after this? Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever look at him without seeing the man who'd forged my signature and laughed about hiding me? I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I need distance. I need time to process what you've done and what it means for who we are to each other going forward. Maybe someday we can rebuild something. But not today. Not for a long time. Lucas nodded, looking broken. I understand. After they left, I sat in the conference room with Michael, feeling exhausted and hollow. You did the right thing, Michael said gently. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you saved your son from something much worse. Did I? Because right now it feels like I just destroyed my relationship with my only child. You stopped him from destroying himself and hurting innocent people. If you'd done nothing, he would have defrauded Charles Hendrickson, gotten caught eventually anyway, and ended up in federal prison. This way, he has a chance to rebuild legitimately. What if he doesn't take that chance? What if he violates the agreement? Michael's expression was somber. Then you'll have to follow through with prosecution. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork and emotional exhaustion. Michael filed the agreement and set up the auditing schedule. Lucas and Vivian withdrew from the Hendrickson deal, citing internal restructuring concerns that apparently Charles Hendrickson accepted without suspicion. I learned later, through Dorothy, that Lucas had been forced to sell Vivian's car, a BMW SUV, and several pieces of expensive furniture to raise the $50,000 he owed me. The money appeared in my bank account exactly 28 days after our confrontation, 2 days before the deadline. Lucas called me twice during those weeks. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. Vivian never called at all. But something else happened during that time. Something I hadn't expected. James Chin, Lucas's business operations manager, reached out to me again. This time, when we spoke, he revealed that he'd been suspicious about the financial documentation for months. He tried to verify some of the accounts and couldn't find any trace of them. When he'd asked Lucas about it, he'd been told the accounts were private family trusts that were none of his business. I almost quit, James told me during our phone conversation. But I kept thinking about all the employees who depend on the company for their livelihood. If I quit and the whole thing collapsed, they'd all lose their jobs. You're not responsible for Lucas's fraud, I said. You shouldn't have to carry that burden. Maybe not. But Mrs. Montgomery, I want you to know something. The core technology, the data analytics platform Lucas built, it's actually brilliant. Without all the lies and fraud, just the legitimate business, it could be successful. It would take longer, require more work, but it's genuinely valuable. Why are you telling me this? James hesitated. Because I've been thinking. Lucas is a brilliant programmer but a terrible businessman and an even worse person. But the technology deserves a chance. And the employees deserve better leadership. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you might want to consider becoming more actively involved in the company. Not as an investor, I know you don't have that kind of money. But as a board member. Someone with oversight authority. Someone who can make sure Lucas runs the business ethically going forward. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. James, I'm 70 years old. I was a librarian. I don't know anything about tech startups. But you know about integrity. You know about accountability. And you know your son well enough to keep him honest. That's what the company needs right now. I thought about it for a long time after that conversation. Did I want to be that involved in Lucas's life, in his business? After everything that had happened, did I want that kind of ongoing connection? But then I thought about the employees James had mentioned. Good people who were just trying to make a living, who had no idea their CEO had been committing fraud. Did they deserve to lose their jobs because Lucas had made terrible choices? And I thought about Charles Hendrickson, who'd almost lost $10 million. How many other potential investors might Lucas and Vivian try to defraud in the future if someone wasn't watching them closely? A week later, I called James back. I'll do it. I'll join the board. But on one condition, I want complete financial transparency. Every account, every transaction, every business decision. No secrets. Agreed, James said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I'll start the paperwork immediately." 3 months after the confrontation in Michael's office, I attended my first board meeting at Datacore Analytics. The company was struggling. Without the Hendrickson investment, they'd had to drastically scale back their growth plans. Several employees had been laid off. The expensive Belmont Heights house was on the market. Lucas looked different. Older. Tired. The easy confidence he'd always carried was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. When he saw me walk into the conference room, his expression was complicated: shame, gratitude, resentment all mixed together. "Mom," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here as your mother," I said clearly. "I'm here as a board member with oversight authority. Those are 2 different roles." "I understand." The meeting was tense but productive. I asked hard questions about every financial line item. I challenged assumptions. I demanded documentation for every expense. And slowly, very slowly, I began to see a different Lucas emerge. One who was forced to build something real instead of something based on lies. One who had to earn success instead of fabricating it. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was a start. 6 months after everything had fallen apart, I was sitting in my small apartment in Santa Monica when my phone rang. It was Lucas. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "Lucas. I was wondering, would you be willing to have coffee with me? Not a board meeting. Not business. Just coffee. As mother and son. I understand if you say no, but I'm asking anyway." I looked around my modest apartment, the place I'd been living while Lucas and Vivian had built their fraudulent empire. The place they'd been ashamed of, that hadn't fit their carefully constructed image. But it was honest. It was real. It was mine. "Coffee," I said finally. "Next Tuesday. 10 a.m. There's a place near my apartment." "Thank you," Lucas said, and his voice cracked. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "Stay in the back room, Margaret. We don't want you upsetting the guests with your presence." I stood there at 70 years old, being hidden like broken furniture, but what I discovered in the room they didn't want me to see changed everything. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that at 70 years old, after everything I'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made, that I would find myself being treated like an inconvenience by my own son. But there I was, standing in the cramped backroom of Lucas's newly renovated craftsman home in the tree-lined suburbs of Belmont Heights, California, surrounded by cleaning supplies, cardboard storage boxes, and the undeniable feeling that I had become expendable. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and disappointment. Through the thin walls, I could hear the clatter of caterers preparing for what my daughter-in-law, Vivian, had called the most important evening of our lives. Important enough to invite me. Not important enough to actually include me. Let me back up and tell you how I got here, how a woman who spent 40 years as the head librarian at Riverside Public Library, who raised a son essentially on her own after my husband's health made it impossible for him to work, who always prided herself on dignity and self-respect, ended up hidden in a back room like an embarrassing family secret. It started 3 weeks ago with a phone call. "Mom?" Lucas's voice had sounded warm on the phone, almost like the boy I remembered. "How are you doing?" I'd been sitting in my small one-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica, the one I'd moved to after selling the family house following Richard's death 3 years prior. The apartment was nothing special: aging carpet, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a view of the parking lot, but it was mine, and it was all I could afford on my pension and Social Security. "I'm doing well, sweetheart," I'd said, my heart lifting at the sound of his voice. It had been nearly 2 months since our last conversation. "How are you and Vivian?" "That's actually why I'm calling. We're hosting a party, an engagement celebration for my business partner, Thomas Hendrickson, and his fiancée, Claire. It's going to be a pretty big event. Thomas's family is flying in from Boston, and there will be some potential investors there. I'd felt a flutter of excitement. That sounds wonderful, Lucas. We'd love for you to come, Mom. It's been too long since you've been to the house. Too long indeed. The last time I'd visited their home in Belmont Heights had been Christmas, almost 10 months ago. Even then, I'd felt like an outsider looking in at their perfect life. The renovated house with its vaulted ceilings and designer furniture, the expensive cars in the driveway, the way Vivian spoke about their social circle as if they were royalty mixing with commoners. But this was an invitation. A chance to be part of my son's life again. I'd love to come, I'd said, probably too quickly, too eagerly. What can I bring? Oh, don't worry about bringing anything. We've got it all covered. Are you sure? I could make that lemon cake you used to love. Your grandmother's recipe. There had been a pause. That's sweet, Mom, but Vivian's hired professional caterers for this. It's going to be pretty formal. Of course, I'd said, feeling the first small sting of dismissal. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Great. Saturday, May 18th, 6:30 p.m. I'll text you the address. Lucas, I know where you live. Right. Of course. See you then, Mom. The call had ended with that hollow feeling that our conversations always seemed to leave me with lately, like I'd been speaking to a stranger who happened to have my son's voice. But I'd been determined to make the most of it. I'd gone to Macy's and spent more than I should have on a new dress, a modest navy blue sheath that the saleswoman assured me was elegantly timeless. I'd had my silver hair professionally styled at a salon instead of just trimming it myself over the bathroom sink like I usually did. I'd even bought new shoes, low heels that wouldn't aggravate my arthritis but still looked presentable. And I'd made the lemon cake anyway. I couldn't help myself. It was a connection to better times, to Sunday afternoons when Lucas was young and would sit at the kitchen counter doing homework while I baked, sneaking tastes of the batter when he thought I wasn't looking. The cake was a tangible memory of when I was essential to his life, not optional. On Saturday evening, I'd driven my aging Honda Civic from Santa Monica to Belmont Heights, a journey of about 30 miles that took me nearly an hour in traffic. The entire drive, I'd practiced conversation topics in my head. I wanted to be interesting, engaging, someone my son would be proud to introduce to his business associates. The house sat on a corner lot, a beautifully restored 1920s craftsman with a wide front porch, gabled roof, and what looked like at least 3,000 square feet of living space. The neighborhood was the kind where every lawn was perfectly manicured, every house looked like it had been professionally staged, and every car in every driveway cost more than I'd paid for my apartment's entire year of rent. I'd parked on the street, not wanting to block the circular driveway where a catering van was already unloading supplies. I'd carefully carried my cake up the stone walkway, noting the Japanese maple trees flanking the entrance and the custom wrought iron house numbers that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I'd rung the doorbell at exactly 5:30 p.m. 1 hour early, just as I'd planned. Time to help, to be useful, to prove my value. Vivian had answered the door. My daughter-in-law was 34 years old, blonde, beautiful in the way that required professional maintenance. The kind of woman who had standing appointments for hair, nails, facials, and probably a dozen other beauty treatments I'd never even heard of. She was wearing a champagne-colored silk dress that draped perfectly over her yoga-sculpted figure, diamond studs in her ears that caught the light, and an expression of barely concealed irritation. Margaret, she'd said, not quite smiling. Her eyes, an icy blue that always reminded me of winter lakes, had swept over me in a way that made me acutely aware of every thread of my discount department store dress. You're early. I thought I could help with the preparations, I'd offered, holding up the cake carrier. I made Lucas's favorite, Grandmother Helena's lemon cake with the cream cheese frosting. Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows had risen slightly as she stared at the cake carrier like I was offering her a dead fish. How thoughtful, she'd said, the word dripping with something that definitely wasn't gratitude. Though I'm not sure where we'll put it. The caterers have prepared a complete dessert menu. Crème brûlée, chocolate soufflé, Italian gelato bar, all professionally presented to match the aesthetic of the evening. "Oh," I'd said, feeling foolish. "Well, maybe just for later? For the family?" "This isn't forgiveness," I said clearly. "This is just coffee. We'll see what happens after that." "I understand. I'll see you Tuesday." After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened. About the son I'd raised and the stranger he'd become. About betrayal and fraud and the painful choice I'd had to make. And about the possibility, slim but real, that maybe, eventually, we could find our way back to something resembling a relationship. But not today. Not yet. For now, I had my integrity. I had my self-respect. I had my small apartment and my modest income and my clear conscience. And that was enough. Final reflection. I'm 70 years old, and I've learned something important. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes love means letting the people we care about face the consequences of their actions, even when it breaks our hearts. Lucas made his choices. I made mine. He chose fraud and lies and ambition without ethics. I chose truth and consequences and my own dignity. And when they tried to hide me in the back room, when they told me to stay out of sight, I walked into the only room that truly mattered, the one where truth and justice lived. They thought they were hiding me. Instead, I discovered them. And that discovery changed everything. Now I want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where family loyalty conflicted with doing what was right? Have you ever had to make the painful choice between protecting someone you love and protecting innocent people from being hurt? Comment below and share your story. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this struggle. And if you found value in my story, please consider watching the other videos on this channel. Each one tells a story of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges and finding the courage to do what's right, even when it costs them everything. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, your dignity, your integrity, your self-respect, these things matter more than any relationship, any amount of money, any image of success. Never let anyone convince you to hide who you are. You matter. Your truth matters. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk out of the back room and into the light.